Summer session number 8. We'll begin our first mindful minute by tuning into this present moment, taking a few calming breaths. You can gently guide the breath from where it is now to a more calm place by releasing tension around it. Become aware of sensations you're feeling in the body, releasing any tension you find and settling into a nice, stable, balanced, but soft and malleable posture. Become aware of the feeling of the paper under your hands, and maybe give a little stretch here to the arms before we start working. You can wiggle the fingers to wake them up a little. And we'll transition over to doing our art prompt for the day, which is this little collection of reefy-like objects. There are some very nice simple shapes here. And to start with, I'm just beginning with the waves on the border to the side and underneath. These very simple curved sort of triangles offer a really great opportunity to practice thin to thick and thick to thin lines. So basically what I'm doing is I'm starting very light and then pressing harder as I get to the tip and then lifting off as I pull away, so that the tip where the two lines meet is going to be a thicker line on the top, and then that little bottom is going to lift off lightly. You can try doing these in the opposite direction too if you like. This time I'm starting from the bottom and going to that tip and then lifting off as I go away. Though I do have to say that I found the other way a little bit easier to get a nice thin line on the bottom. Now I'm just going to start outlining some of these shapes. Keeping in mind the basic forms that are underneath them. These really simple shapes also offer great opportunities to practice thicker and thinner lines. You'll notice that the outer edges are thicker than these little lines inside. With pens, it can be a bit harder to get as much thick or thin variation as with a marker, but you can just go over it again and draw a thicker line by sort of just trying to follow your original line and going just a little bit outside of that in some places. But really, just going over it more than once will add a thicker line. Pressure can obviously still help to play a role here when we're doing thick and thin lines. So I'm doing the inner lines very softly and even allowing some breaks to happen with that very soft pressure. I have a bunch of pinks selected to go with the rest of my crafting papers and stickers today. But I think I'll start with this rock just because I know I want it to be brown. I'm not sure exactly where I want the pinks to go just yet. So again, I'm just going over the outer line more than once, kind of back and forth until I get a nice thick line. And those inner ones I'll just do once lightly. The bottom-most line can be thicker than all the rest of the lines just to give it more weight. Now these little coral tubes are very simple cone shapes. So you can start with the outline like I am on these, or you can start with the top circle and then draw some lines sort of receding away from them. And if you're not following a design like I am here, you'll want to work from the ones closest to you to furthest away, just to make your life a little easier. That way there you don't have to worry about what's going to overlap. You just start building from the front and working your way back a little. But again, if you're working on this and it's your journal, this is a place to make little art flub-ups and draw kind of sketchily and messily. This is a good place to experiment a little and test out how markers and pens and pencils interact with each other, or which one's best for which things. I often like to use pens for outlines and fill in with marker or with pencil. And depending on what I'm filling, the pencil gives sort of a rougher texture, so I'll probably use that on my rock. Whereas these little coral fingers, I might use some marker just to put down some nice thick and full lines. The other thing that might work in my favor here is these little coral fingers have a tendency to look a little bit darker at the tips and where they join at the bottom. And since marker can pool and layer on itself, all I really have to do is start at the tip, let a little bit fill in by going away from that tip over and over, and then coming to that bottom point together, and you'll see it'll kind of build up a bit more color at the ends in a very simple, organic way. But you could also go in and dot with the marker at the tips too, to really strengthen that effect. Or you could also fill in the whole thing with pencil and then use marker at the ends to give it that sort of dotty effect. Since these are I think usually sort of rockier looking corals, I'm going to use pencil so that them and my rock look a little rougher. It does help if you're mixing pencil and pen to remember that if you start filling in a little too early, you might get some smudges that drag along. But you can maybe turn those into some happy accents by using them as shading and just filling in a little bit more pencil around that. Now I'm coming to the end of the sand in my hourglass, so I'm going to speed things up a little here. But to finish off, I do want to take out some of the lines from my first coloring pass by doing a more circular motion as I shade in. And maybe finish off by circling a couple of these little spots on the rock before we move on to the writing part. Our second mindful minute, checking in with the breath to see if it's gotten any faster, maybe gently bringing it back to somewhere calmer. Noticing if the posture has slouched at all towards the paper while we were drawing, or if there's any tension in the dominant hand. Bringing it back to somewhere nice and soft, but malleable, and also stable and balanced. Breathing in, feeling the paper under your hands, feeling the seat underneath you supporting you. Maybe stretching out a little bit one more time before we move on, doing some wrist circles and finger flicks before we get to this writing prompt, which is, if you could have a miniature dinosaur as a pet, which would you want and why? So, a very serious question for today's journal prompt. I'll just start, as I normally do, by filling in some color. I'm using a similar sort of pink to one of my coral colors. And I'll also mimic some of the stuff in some of the craft papers I've selected. But of course, I'm going to want to pull some words to the foreground by using different colors. And I think miniature dinosaur has to be one of those words that gets its own color. And I mean, green might be a little obvious, but it does fit my color scheme because it's the same green I used in my little fronds with my coral reef, the seaweed down there. I want to continue in another pink just to see if that matches up better with some of my craft papers, and just to give a little variation too. Use some darker, more red pink as well. to finish things off here. And while I'm doing that, I've been letting my mind wander over to how I might answer this. I'm going to attempt to keep writing in a similar enough font to this, but I'll probably drift over. While I was thinking this over, there was definitely a 9-year-old me just screaming, "Velociraptor! Velociraptor!" Because, of course, those were my favorite of the dinosaurs when I saw Jurassic Park as a kid. They just looked so cool. They were, small like I was, but also dangerous. They inspired fear. Obviously, the T-Rex was the big show, but those raptors were still one of the more thrilling sequences in that, and made for some really fun sort of scenes from that movie. But I got so obsessed with that, I ended up reading Michael Crichton's book, Jurassic Park and the Lost World. And that led me over to a very interesting book that was written from the perspective of a velociraptor called Raptor Red. So it would also be fun to have a miniature velociraptor, because I could call her Raptor Red. Maybe take her for little walks, if such a thing could be trained to go for a walk on a lead. I feel like that could be quite disruptive to the dog park, though. Certainly can let her off leash. So yeah, I think if I did take her for walks, it would scare the heck out of anyone that I meet along the way. Which could be good for late night walks. But might not be the most sociable thing to bring to a dog park. I'm just going to fill in my little starfish down here with a gold pencil while I ponder this question a little bit more. It's a very facetious question to ask what kind of dinosaur you would want as a pet, since I think we're still a far ways off from that. Yeah, we've made some great strides in GMO foods, but I don't think we've gotten that far. Not quite yet. It just occurred to me, thinking about that though, that if we ever did manage to clone dinosaurs, something Jurassic Park and the Lost World and that whole franchise never explored is there would absolutely be a dinosaur meat market that would crop up. I was just checking there to see if this gold was leaking through. I've been using metallic gold on top of metallic pencil for the last little bit because it does stop it from bleeding to the next page as much. So just a little trick: if you have pens that tend to bleed, you can use them as a layer on top of either markers that sit more on top or pencils that will give them something to bleed into that isn't your artwork on the next page. So, thinking back to my very serious question about what kind of dinosaur I might want, and just pondering this issue of the dogs in the dog park while I draw a couple little water bubbles to add some more blue to this. These little floating bubbles did kind of somehow remind me of another dinosaur I was very fond of as a kid, mostly because it can fly, not so much float like a bubble, but bubbles do fly sometimes, in a sense, if you're blowing bubbles and they're carried off on the wind. At any rate, another more reasonable option for this little dino pet that we're pondering here might be a little, and of course I'm going to want to switch to green for this, pterodactyl. Which I had to pause to remember how you actually spell that. I don't know if I've had to actually spell the word pterodactyl since I was a kid reading dino books and drawing dinos. But it would be fun to have a little flying buddy. I could take that for walks on a lead maybe, if, again, such a thing could be trained to walk on a leash. And it would be a little bit less intrusive, I think, than a raptor running around. Who knows? Maybe that could be much, much worse. Maybe it would just attack from above and people would have no way of running away from it. But for some reason, I like the idea of this pterodactyl being walked around on a leash, flying about, or maybe sitting on my shoulder as I walk around. It would be a very interesting pet to have, either way. But hopefully it wouldn't be as scary for the other people in the dog park and wouldn't actually attack any of the poor doggos or small children that I meet along my walks. Perhaps I could even make it more friendly looking. Maybe I could dress it up a little and decorate its wings so that it looks a bit like a butterfly. I'm probably thinking of this because I have some butterflies in my stickers for the crafting part, which we'll check in for our last mindful minute here and just see where the breath has gotten to, gently guide it back to a calmer place while we tune into the sensations of the body. Maybe straighten up if we've scrunched down at all. And find that nice, stable, balanced, but soft and malleable place where we can sit like a nice lump of clay. With a nice, stable base, giving rise to a nice straight spine, which allows the breath freedom of movement. Letting any tension drop away from that. Feeling the paper underneath our hands. And moving on to our crafting part. So, for this, I have a few fun colors, and all of them are actually matching one sticker that you might be able to see on the top of my desk, stuck there. It's a little dinosaur in a hot air balloon, which, I mean, is obviously the sticker that had to be used today. There really were no other options. So, those are the colors that I'm matching to and have been through the different parts. And that's my big thematic mirroring. It's a flying dino. And not sure how I want to arrange everything. I don't want to cover up my writing too much, but since my writing is taking up most of the page, I am going to use this door as a door and make it so that this flips open like another page. That way there I have more room to craft. I don't want to cover up too much, so I'm going to kind of do very light overlaps. Now that I like where that is, I'm just gonna make sure it stays where it is by just putting down one little piece of clear tape so that those under elements can stick there. I'll reinforce the backs in a moment, but that's good enough for now so that I can put on my door's hinges. I've got this peachy sort of pink that again mimics some of these colors. It's also got a bit of transparency too, so I don't have to worry too much about covering up anything underneath too much. I think this is going to be a 3-hinge door, just to give it a little bit more reinforcement. There, I like how that turns. Now I do want to create a frame around this writing prompt, especially since this more reddish pink with some dark purple kind of accents does mirror and go with some of the pinks I used to write stuff down. When it comes to overlapping tapes with each other, I tend to use my decorative tapes for the same orientation. So if I do them horizontally, which usually ends up being the case, just to make sure those designs are very nicely visible, then I'll overlap some of the other tape I was using that's just a solid color on top because they're stickier and they don't lift up at the edges as these very pretty but slightly less sticky tapes are wont to do. This bold black starry tape provides kind of a nice contrast to some of these light pinks and greens that I've been using elsewhere. I'm going to add a little bit of dark green underneath it. And now I'll make sure those don't lift off by adding some pink tape. I think I'll use this on the outside edge. As I'm planning where things go, I'm trying to keep in mind the overall plan. So one of the ways that I make that easier on myself is by keeping my tapes kind of together so I can see what colors I might want to use. Like I still want to use a bit of that green. So I'll separate off the tapes I've used from the ones I still want to use. And also the stickers, the reason I line them up on the back of my desk there on that top row is so that I can keep them in mind and just glance up at any point. I'm not going to say this is foolproof, but it does help just to keep things in view. Now, as transparent as this is, it's going to cover up some writing, so I'm just going to peel my hinges back a bit and slip this under. And that'll actually make a nice contrast with the green under the pink behind my door. I maybe could have done this box in first, but fortunately this tape is pretty sticky, so I don't think it'll do too much damage to have lifted it off a bit there. Yeah, I really do like that overlapping look. So now, my pièce de résistance. I'm not going to save for last this time because I kind of want to use it as a little door handle, the way I've been using some stickers lately. And the way I've been doing that is to keep the backing on the sticker, but just peel up enough of the sticker to sort of sandwich in the paper that I want to sit in behind it. And then the back part needs to be taped down, but this is an effective way of sticking stickers in and keeping them sort of as elements that lift off like that. It also adds some weight and will keep the paper down, which is kind of nice to have. As you're flipping through your pages, you won't have these doors flying open as much. It also does help to make sure that your doors go in the orientation of the pages that they're underneath. So since this door is on the right-handed page, which is called the recto in book making terms, I'm orienting it the same way so that the sticky part is towards the binding and it opens the way that page would turn. It just helps a little to keep the little things like this straight in your journal, because if you have pages that go the other way, sometimes when you're flipping through, they might open in odd ways and get kind of crumpled if you're flipping through quickly. But you can also just be mindful that that's a possibility and flip more cautiously and mindfully when you flip through your journal. I'd like to have some of these stickers poking out a little bit from behind my door. And I think this guy, yeah, should be poking out a bit more than that tree, which is only very lightly poking out from the other side right now. And I like having some of the white space on the back of the door also filled in with some of these stickers. I've run out of sand, so I'll just put some of these on, and where I kind of had planned out putting them, I think I'll stick that guy right there. And that looks pretty good, I think. Although I didn't quite reinforce that back as much as I want. So I'm just going to stick down a little clear tape just to make sure that doesn't flop around too much and opens more solidly. I've got a little edge that I'm just going to fold down. There we go. There, I'm happy with that. So I hope you enjoyed this summer session with a little silly prompt and some very simple shapes to draw. And I hope that in between this and next time you find some time to create your own fun, silly things and prompt yourself with some silly questions about imaginary pets or friends. Just because we're adults doesn't mean we have to act like it, right? So, the music today is, as always, from Lo-Fi Girl and can be found on the playlist Lo-Fi's to Live By's. Thank you so much for watching.